It's that state of overwhelm and feeling like they're caught up in the gears, and they've been so successful. This is a highly successful person who's been very successful in their career, but like they built their own prison, and now they're locked in this. Now they're locked into this prison of their own design, where it's interlocking dependencies, people who are dependent upon them, and really this sort of identity of you know Superman or Superwoman. Like overlay the superhero of your choice. That is the burden of that is just crushing them.
Greetings, everyone. Thomas Cox here with Jim Prinzing, the M2 Managing Managers podcast. A little bit different topic today, executive burnout. What is it? What can you do about it? How can you tell if you've even got it? And a bit of backstory on how Jim got to be an expert on this very topic. So the genesis for this podcast came when Jim recently, you ended up talking to somebody who's a fairly senior executive, and I don't know if they could tell that they had pretty bad burnout, but you could tell. And in the process of about less than 90 minutes, you were able to dramatically help them. Could you tell us the story of what happened there?
Yeah, well, it was a bit more than 90 minutes, but yeah, it was
Okay.
a recent new coaching client, and he reached out because of another client who had a great experience with me, and was looking to do some organizational development with some executive coaching, and really looking to level up his leadership. And so, as I always do, we scheduled a kickoff, and we did this one in two parts, which is a model that I'm starting to adopt more and more because it provides a little bit of reflection time between, part A and part B, both for them, which was my
Smart.
original intent, but realizing super valuable for me as well to review and reflect. And so we did the kickoff part A, which centered on going through saboteurs assessment and identifying self-limiting beliefs, and hitting on also just the state of play that existed. And by the end of that day, I realized, wow, this person is, if they're not in burnout, they're on the edge of burnout. And so came back on part two the next day and completely redirected the kickoff plan. And rather than focusing on setting 6-month goals, which I would typically do, we developed a list of like 4 to 6 week goals and called it a blue sky clarity plan, and spent that part of the kickoff building a plan together to get them some blue sky, get them out of the weeds, and
Nice.
uh, primarily feeling better about life again, in small, meaningful
Right.
ways, and creating a list of practices that they could begin implementing. So, yeah,
Huh.
infinitely
Okay.
powerful.
And okay, I'm going to back up. So you were able to tell after that first half of the kickoff, the first session, you recognized the signs of burnout, even if the two of you had not already necessarily agreed that that was what was taking place. Uh, And I'm hearing out of the weeds and into the blue sky. So what were you picking up on that clued you in that this is an executive in the grip of incipient burnout?
Yeah, it's that state of overwhelm and feeling like they're caught up in the gears, and they've been so successful. I mean, this is a highly successful person who's been very successful in their career, but like they built their own prison, and now they're locked in this. Now they're locked into this prison of their own design, where it's interlocking dependencies, people who are dependent upon them, and really this sort of identity of you know Superman or Superwoman, like overlay, the superhero of your choice, that is the burden of that is just crushing them.
Oh, okay. So this is so by being very successful and being very capable and, being there for other people and helping your team succeed and being kind of this clutch player who is, well, really able to deliver a lot of value to a lot of different parts of the business, which can feel great. Like who doesn't want to make the diving catch in the ninth inning to win the game? Who
Right.
doesn't want to,
Absolutely.
go the extra mile and do the extra thing and be the special person? But if you create a system that depends on that, and then you're called on to do that again and again and again, endlessly into the future. And it sounds like being in the weeds was a part of this, that they're being sucked sort of like downward into the organization on an ongoing basis. You're nodding. Am I in the right space here?
Yeah, and it's different, I think, you know, executive burnout perhaps is different from, you can have all kinds of burnout, right? You can have burnout in lots of different roles. And I think
Yeah.
executive
Compassion
burnout.
fatigue for nurses. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. And those are, and not to say that no version of burnout is worse than any other version of burnout. They're all awful
Right.
and
They're all bad.
terrible, but their root causes are different. And I think executive burnout in particular, just has its own unique flavor to it, which is, partly built of, the way that we're taught to lead. Part of the
Say
way
more
that.
about the way we are taught to lead. Let's pretend I don't know anything because that's probably a safe assumption.
Well, I call it the life bus. Like you get on the bus, like you're like, you graduate school, you get into, work, and all of a sudden you're good at your work. So you get promoted into management of some kind. And, the formula is work harder, do more stuff, get promoted, work harder, do more stuff, get promoted, work harder, do more stuff, get promoted, and you keep doing that. And along the way, most of us, level up our leadership skills along the way as well. But at,
Well,
for
you're going to
many,
have to.
right, but it's always that same formula. And it's difficult to realize when that formula has, built that sort of prison around you, that you you all of a sudden feel trapped and like you
Yeah.
can't breathe.
So, I am aware that in, healthy growth or healthy performance, that there's always, there's time for recovery, there's time for reflection, there's like intense training for the marathon, and then you take off and you relax after having done the marathon, or you train hard for a couple of days during the week, and then you have a couple of recovery days during the week. And it's sounding like um, a lot of executives build plans, maybe not even consciously, but when you create your job in part by how you perform it, you create expectations in part by how, what am I good at? I'll do more of that. And if you don't bake in, maybe you haven't been trained to, maybe it hasn't occurred to you, maybe you didn't need to when you were in your 20s. There's no recovery time because like you keep moving up, you have more responsibility, there's less time to do everything. You like doing things really well, like you get a lot of, positive internal strokes and external praise for, you know, making the diving catch and being a high performer and doing a lot of really good work and saving other people's bacon. Uh, and if you institutionalize it, wow, like if we keep, at some point that breaks. Like, if not this time, then the next time or the time after that. But at some point, you can't just keep increasing it. The human
Right.
body doesn't handle it.
Right.
Okay. Would this now be a time to ask you the self-revealing question of, so Jim, how did you spot this in this other person?
Well, from personal experience, 4 years ago,
Yeah, you did this
I
to
was
yourself.
I was very much at that spot, the exact same spot this client was at. I was sitting in my office one night, staring blankly at the screen, and literally hit a wall. Had a meeting earlier in the day that normally, under, non-burnout conditions would have been fine. But it was sort of like, my analogy at the time was like I had just run multiple marathons back to back, and I was exhausted and like collapsing in the parking lot. And, you know, the bus came along and said, "Hey, you're late for the next marathon." And I was like, "No, no, I can't, I literally can't do it." And, leading up to that was that feeling of like I should feel great. I'm on top of the world. I'm, I love the organization that I work for. I love my team. I love our mission. Like, check all the boxes. I got the Porsche 911 in the garage. You know, by all accounts, looking from the outside, I should literally feel
Oh,
like $1 million.
which would make it even
Jim's on
harder
top of the
to
world.
spot or acknowledge that there's a problem because, like, well, I mean, looking at from the outside, like all my traditional success metrics are all the boxes are checked. Like, why is
Y-
this not a green
Yet,
dashboard? Why are all these
why do I
blinking red
feel
lights?
numb? Yeah, why do I feel numb? Why do I feel empty? Why do I have no energy? Right?
Oof. Wow. Okay. So having hit the wall yourself in a big and mighty way, you could spot it in this climb.
Yeah. And I think another sign is all the things that used to help you when you got into that spot, they don't work anymore.
Things like what?
Just whatever, like taking time off, taking a week off, you know, whatever your clarity routine is, going for a jog, spend time with family and friends, whatever those things that you normally could help like reset, like when those little resets stop working.
Because they're not enough to handle the accumulation of more and more stress and more
Right.
demands and less white space, it
Yeah.
sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other
Oof.
piece of it, which you kind of hit on in one of your questions, is there's so much of our identity that is wrapped up, especially for, again, I'll just speak to executives. There's so much wrapped up in, CEO Jim, right? Like there's so much identity around that. And your own personal identity becomes confused with that. And I think it's something that's endemic of our culture. Like what's one of the first things people ask you, to make small
What do
talk?
you do
What
for
do
a
you do?
living?
What do you do for a living? And they equate like you as a human being with, your vocation. And there's parts of that are really great, but there's parts of that are incredibly
Yeah,
unhealthy.
it's kind of like we've reinvented the medieval village where Joe Miller is the
Right.
miller, and
Yeah.
that's
And you've
his
got,
name and it's his profession and it's his identity. Only it's worse than that because you never stop doing that.
right. Yeah, exactly.
Oof,
Yeah.
oof. Which probably makes it harder to acknowledge that there's a problem, and B, hard to do a new behavior that might take you away from the behaviors that you sort of trained yourself. Like I see myself as, well, I don't want to say all the positive things I think about myself. Well, maybe I should. I think of myself as very smart. And then I run into things where I'm not very smart. And it's hard for me to admit that I'm not being very smart or that I lack knowledge or that I'm not able to puzzle something out. And it makes me kind of mad. And I get into denial about it, which is literally the exact wrong thing to do if I actually want to get to the other side. And so I eventually learned to think of myself as a naive questioner who's not afraid to look stupid asking stupid questions. Like that's been a much more useful self image. It doesn't trap me in my past knowledge and it opens me up to new future knowledge.
Well, I
Took a
think what's
while.
interesting is in that, at least for myself, there was things that I told myself I was good at, oh, I'm good at setting boundaries. Oh, I'm good at delegating. Oh, I'm good at, X, Y, Z.
Therefore, it can't be any of those things.
Right. Right. I mean, I was an excellent team builder. Excellent. I had an excellent team. I
Okay.
still
And
wasn't,
yet,
yet I still wasn't truly delegating to the degree that I should have been.
okay,
And
you
it was,
kept yourself in loops that you in retrospect realize you could easily have backed away from.
Exactly. And could have created, clearer decision rights and more agency for the team and more clarity. And there was parts of myself that were, in retrospect, were driven by saboteurs. Our favorite
In
podcast
case
called
anyone is new to the
saboteurs.
podcast, yeah, to define saboteur briefly, for those joining us who may not already know the saboteur model. So I think of, and correct me, Jim, but I think of the saboteur as your the strength in us that gets misused because we're scared, and we end up using that strength, like attention to detail or what have you, in and it serves an unclean attempt to over control or um, yeah, the saboteurs are how our strengths get used against us, and we end up being further away from our goals, not closer, because my love of being in control of things, I control too many things, or I like getting things right, and so I over focus on too many tiny details, and I get so lost in the weeds that I slow everything down. Or I don't like conflict, and so I avoid conflict, and I start avoiding making decisions, or I avoid difficult conversations, which just means that
Or
those
for,
things
or for me,
linger longer.
yeah, for me, my chief saboteur was hyperachiever. So my own personal value and worthiness, which is really the powerful word there, worthiness, right? Like, am I worthy
Worthiness.
of love? Am I worthy of, the our friend, the imposter syndrome, right? Like, why am I getting paid this much money? Do I deserve that beautiful car in the garage, right? Like all of that, hyperachiever plays into that because, as a kid, I learned like, hey, you achieve stuff, you get accolade, people like you, you know, rinse and repeat, rinse
Right.
and repeat,
And we like
rinse and
being
repeat.
liked.
Yeah, of course. Like, who doesn't like being liked? But it's like the needle in the arm, and you got to keep getting that hit of achievement in order to be like, oh yeah, I'm worth it. See, which just pushes harder and harder and harder. Um, and then you pair that with other, everybody has multiple saboteurs, and some of them are louder and some of them are quieter. You pair that with another saboteur, um, like people pleaser or something like that. And now you've got
Yeah.
the,
And there's
you
9
know,
of them.
yep. Now you've got this tangled mess. And so um, that's where, in coaching people in burnout, that's like one of the first steps is like, let's figure out what your inner critics are, because that is a really fast and quick way to start to ask. It's not the solve, but it starts to ask the questions of, how did we get here? And as you said, like those saboteurs came from a good place, they get you a long way, which makes it even
Oh,
harder because
yeah.
sometimes,
You were the CEO of a multi-million dollar
yeah,
company with what,
believe
hundreds?
me, hyperachiever is a lot of what got me there. But uh, that analogy of, the football game where the plays in the first half of the game, that helped you win the first half don't necessarily help you win the second half. And so, part
Yeah.
of it is needing to learn a new playbook to carry you through the second half of the game.
Okay. All right. So you diagnosed this coaching client, and I've now gotten you to self-reveal a little bit of how you knew what to look for and how you spotted it. Can we talk about the path outward?
Yeah, I
Okay,
mean,
maybe I.
yeah, I think the path out is different for everyone. But
Yeah.
the first thing
Okay.
that's got to happen is you've got to get blue sky, because you cannot, when you're operating in a state of deep burnout, you can't, you just can't, like, you can't, like, you're not going to be able to layer in, new leadership paradigms and, begin teaching your team new things like that. Like, the first step
Right. You
is
can't layer yet more work on top of the burned out
no,
person.
no,
Yeah.
no. That's why the first step has to be creating some calm and some blue sky. And so, and what that means for each person really is dependent upon their saboteurs, like what's driving it. And then we can, identify, you know, a couple of practical tools, such as, for some people, it's going to be time, really religious time blocking. For others, it's going to be, sitting down with a stop, start, continue list or a elevate and delegate, tool to understand like, okay, what am I hanging on to that I really don't need to be hanging on to? And, let's build a quick delegation list of things that need to be delegated right away, um, and with clarity and context.
Nice. Okay. So if somebody were to come to you, Jim, and say, "Hey, Jim, I think maybe I got some of this here executive burnout you're talking about," the first thing you'd probably put them through would be that saboteur self-assessment.
Yeah. Yep. Do the saboteur self assessment, and then spend, you know, 60 to 75 minutes talking through that, and you know, developing one or two immediate solves that, I'm always a fan of the 80-20 rule. Like, let's do
Hmm.
the 20% of things that get you 80% of the results. And so, every time I'm talking to a client about anything, that's always in the back of my mind is let's find something that the time you put into it is going to be leveraged at least 3x. If you spend 20 minutes doing it, you're going to get at least an hour back of your time or sanity. 10x is the general. That's like the 3x is the minimum. 10x is the target. Like, let's do high leverage things that begin creating blue sky immediately.
So you've mentioned blue sky several times, and I know that means something to you, but I'm not sure if it means the same thing to me. So what kind of blue sky are we talking?
I think of it in terms of like, when you're in that state of burnout, it just like, it's like a storm is going on and there's no clarity and everything is dark and black and scary and it just feels yuck. And there's something so great, in that state when you can just get a spot of blue sky up there and be like, oh, I feel the sunshine again. It's like, oh, life is actually worth living. Like,
Mm,
that's why I use the term blue sky, because I really like I like visceral, explicit descriptive terms, and blue sky I
okay.
think is the closest analogy I've gotten to like that feeling. Because
That feeling
of some clarity and some calm. And, you know, as we're sitting here, we've had storms out here on the coast the last 3 days. And there's actually like the sun just came out. So we're having a blue sky moment as we speak.
gotcha. Okay, so if I'm the executive and I'm resonating with this whole, wow, I think maybe I might be burned out because Jim's description sounds a lot like me. I'm down in the weeds. I feel overwhelmed. I've lost my joy. Things that used to help me reset aren't working anymore, etc. And the goal of your intervention with them is to get them fairly quickly into a blue sky experience of some ease and some openness and some relaxation and some perspective and clearer direction, all of which much of or not all of which they've lost track of prior
Yeah,
to
and
that.
that's just, I mean, that's step one. But it's like when you're
Okay,
at the bottom, when you're at the bottom, sometimes you just need somebody to, throw a rope down and help you get, you know, help you start with the first rung of the ladder, like so that you can,
gotcha.
I mean, when you're in that state, I know that for me, if somebody had offered me, you know, a session like that really understood what I was going through. I had a lot of people who wanted to help, but
Sure.
it's the right kind of help. I needed somebody who could listen to me empathetically, who really knew where I was, and who had a couple of tools or frameworks that could help me think clearly enough to be able
Yeah.
to take the next step and the next step and the next step.
Yeah, I gotcha. Well, let's talk about those next steps then. So it sounds like it's a couple of hours of talking with a person, and there's a saboteur assessment involved, and there's not a simple recipe. It's very much customized to who they are and what their circumstance is and how they're wired internally. But you also mentioned frameworks just now, some of the things that you bring to help provide more clarity. Can you say something about those?
Well, from there, it really evolves into identifying, the organizational design challenges that
Mm.
each person is built in. You know, it starts to work into our bigger transformative leadership lab, you know, constructs and models. So it really kind of evolves into more of true organizational design.
What's something that you've done
Defining
for yourself or you've done for somebody else to help?
defining defining decision rights,
What's a
clarity.
decision right? Pretend I'm stupid. It's not a stretch.
Yeah.
I
Well,
might think I
one
know
of
what that means, but I could.
here's I mean, one of the things that many executives experience is inbox overload. And so if you just go through an inbox and you start to identify like what of this, one of the problems with email is if you're really good at replying to email,
You'll get
uh,
more.
you get more email, right? So it's one of those things that's kind of this self-fulfilling, torrential, avalanche of stuff that the faster you dig yourself out, the faster it comes down on you. And one of the problems with that is just unclear decision rights from
Mm.
all of the people who are
So,
sending you
what's an
email.
example of clear decision?
So it could be like, and of course we've got to understand what the context is that the person's operating in. But let's say it's a subordinate, and they're copying you relentlessly on everything. Uh, Having a place like the like the one-on-one model in O3, where you've got a repository for those follow-ups and those CCs. So instead of landing in your inbox, those could be quickly discussed in a one-on-one meeting. The decision rights part of that would be identifying clearly like I don't need to know about this until it's done, or I only need to know about this when it reaches a certain point, and then explicitly clarifying that to the person who's sending the email, like, hey, don't need to know about this until it hits X milestone, or trust you completely on this decision. This decision's yours. Just let me know what the results are afterwards. Or in some cases, it's, hey, before you make a decision on this, gather all the facts and bring them to me, and we'll make the decision together. It's the racy model of decision rights, but applied a bit
Right.
more
The
practically and a bit
the
more
the
ad
racy
hoc.
chart where it shows a row for some task or milestone or activity or decision, and then the columns are the different people. And then there's an R for they're responsible for it, or there's an A for they get to advise you on it, in C and I and so forth. So clarifying for your subordinates how much you're going to trust them and how little you do and don't need to know, or when you need to be brought in and when you can be left out of things. Because
Right.
some of them are just
That's
going
just,
to
I
include
mean,
you
and
on
that's just, and
everything.
that's just
Be safe.
right. Yeah, that's just one. I mean, another thing might be, really going through position descriptions and identifying what each position is really accountable for. Most position descriptions on this planet are completely and utterly useless. Like
Yes.
they're a laundry list of quote unquote responsibilities. They give that person, the person who's actually doing that job, zero clarity about what their real job is. Most of the real clarity might come from the summary, where it might say in some vague way, how that position supports the mission. But you've got to be a bit of a sleuth or detective, or really be able to pick up on those keywords in order to do that. And probably unless you're an organizational design specialist or live in this world, it's probably not what most people are doing when they read a job description. Um, but if you go through role by role, starting with your subordinates, and help, work with each person and identify like, what is this role truly accountable for? And by the way, that
Yeah.
accountability also drives the RACI model. Because if you're accountable for
Right.
it, you've got to be responsible for it. And it helps, drive the decision rights matrix as well. But again, giving that explicit clarity. Again, explicit is one of my favorite words because there's no better word that I know of that describes something in detail. Like call it out explicitly. Don't leave it up to assumption. Don't assume the person knows what their accountabilities are. Make those accountabilities explicit, and also make explicit what success looks like. You know, when this accountability is done well, all of our stakeholders are happy and we receive, 80% or above on stakeholder, satisfaction surveys. Describe it explicitly. And then that person knows, hey, what's my job? What decisions do I have the authority to make? And what am I accountable for? And how do I know if I'm being successful? And of course, you still want to give them feedback, but they can just hold up their own position description and get the answers that they need as well.
Yeah, the
So
more someone can like look at their own work product and their work context, and they can assess for themselves how well they're doing without you having to come and interpret for them, which takes more work up front to set that up. Um, I may have I may have told you, Jim, and maybe I've even said this on the podcast. One of my earliest jobs was as a busboy in a restaurant, and I never really understood that job until the last day. And the reason I understood it on the last day is they said, "Hey, Thomas, go tell the new bus person, like brief them on your job." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. What is my job?" And I finally it clicked, and I said, if you just one piece of it was like, when do you move dishes out back up to the cooks? And the answer is the cooks should never run out of dishes. And if they have enough, then they have enough. You don't need to take them more than and don't over focus on one size of dish and neglect the others. The idea is that the cook should never have food coming off the grill or out of their area, and there's not a clean plate to put it on. And as long as there's always a clean plate to put it on, they'll be happy, and you're doing your job for them. And then here's what you do for the waitresses, and here's what you do, blah, blah, blah. And so there are these internal constituencies that when you make them happy, that is what a good job is for this role. And I realized I wished I'd known that when I started the job. I would have done a better job. And I wish all jobs were documented in a way where it's like, here's who you make happy. Here's how you make them happy. Here's how to tell whether they're happy. Here's an explicit way to check. And by the way, you're allowed to get into dialogue with them and verify that that's how you're both going to judge how well you're serving them. And I never had to go to the restaurant owner and say, "Hey, boss, how am I doing?" Like I could literally look at my own workstation and my own work areas and these 3 or 4 areas I was responsible for. And once I knew my job, I could tell if I was doing a good job. And that's what we want to do. Which means that the restaurant owner is not chasing the busboys around, having to give them feedback or micromanage them or tell them to do their jobs or, direct them hither and yon, which would have been exhausting.
yeah. And I guess so zooming back out, really past the blue sky, it's really about helping that executive, leader figure out what is the real value that they bring to the organization, because that is one of the things that gets confusing, especially if you're in a role like CEO. Like when I reflect back on my time as a CEO, what I was, my role at the beginning of my tenure in 2014 was very different from, or I should say, at the end of my tenure was very different from the beginning. Meaning, what I was doing on a daily basis, because we grew an organization, right? So started out with roughly 150 people and ended up with 500 people and multiple locations and grew a brewery from like 2,000 barrels to 50,000 barrels in multiple states. And, it were radically different role, but it had the exact same job title.
Right.
And at each growth level, the job, like the role was different and the value
Yes.
that I brought was different. There was one point where I was literally doing the production planning for the brewery. Like I was planning like what beer gets brewed on what day, goes into what tank, and doing the logistics planning, you know, fast, 5 years later, like that would have been insane if I was still doing that. For
Right.
many reasons, one of which the guy that was doing it was far more brilliant at it than I ever was. Like I was adequate, right? And he was brilliant. It was Chuck,
Right.
amazing. Like, and so, there's that part of it. But the other part is it gets really confusing. Like, what's your value? Um, and you still, like, many times you're hanging on to the value that you used to create and conflating it with the value that you should be creating. And at that executive leadership level, it's, like we always say, it's up and out, right? It's out the windshield, it's in the future, it's seeing the opportunities, and then it's guiding and coaching the the organization. It's interacting with your stakeholders, boards, community partners, other businesses, right? It's a vastly different job.
Sure.
So,
And the
and
extent to which you're being
even at
pulled
a mid level,
in or down.
yeah, VP or director, the same, the same still applies. Like you need to be much more up and out, interacting with, the leadership of the company you're operating with.
Right.
And so
So the
part
idea
of,
is that
part
rather
of that
than
value is created by your saboteurs, like if your saboteur's controller, you're great at controlling everything. Now you're trying to control everything for a whole bunch of subordinate managers that report to you. And boy, that starts to break down real quick. If you have to control and make every single decision, like the weight of that becomes impossible. You know, if you got the hyperachiever saboteur, all of a sudden you need to realize that it's not about you. It's you you achieving means your organization is achieving. And so you getting those little dopamine hits of achievement, that's not the same thing as your organization achieving. Like you've got to realize that the achievement is, all of the people around you achieving, the organization as a whole. And even if you realize that at a logical level, which many people do, it's not the same at an emotional level, right?
sure. So you got to believe it in your head, you got to feel it in your heart, and you got to behave it in your daily actions. And those can take a long time to shift
Yeah. And
because
so,
all your muscle memory was developed years ago in the prior version of the role.
right. And so a big piece of the next phase after getting some blue sky is really diving into, like, as an executive, what are your superpowers? And therefore, what's the true value that you bring to the organization? And what's the true value that the organization needs? And then beginning to redesign the role in a sustainable way. And that's where now you start to deploy, some of the bigger ticket items that we talked about, like, the organizational design stuff, job descriptions
Got it.
and O
Yeah,
three
and we
model.
might do entire episodes on those things at some future date. Okay. So I feel like we've covered pretty thoroughly the ground around this thing that you've found such joy in, Jim, which is helping executives identify and overcome executive burnout. Um, what should somebody do if they think maybe they qualify?
Just reach out to me and ask for a executive leadership blue sky session, and
Okay.
we'll get one scheduled. Um,
What
it
do you charge for that?
uh it's variable,
Okay.
but um, you know, I've got a scholarship program in place. So if it's a far stretch for someone, or they're not quite sure,
Sure.
and then uh, but otherwise, I'll do. Don't ask me that, Thomas. I wasn't. You didn't pre-warn me you were going to ask me that question.
We'll cut that section.
Cut that section out.
Maybe the first step is just to have a get to know you call.
Yeah. Well, I'm still on the fence whether I want to charge for it, because charging for something feels more valuable for this client, for that type of client, or offered for free. So I haven't
Yeah,
made a
people
move.
don't value what they get for free, but at the same time, they kind of have to get to know you to build the trust. Yeah, it
Right.
could go
And
either
that's
way.
why I do think the Hermosi, like, credit it toward, future coaching might be the way to go.
Gotcha.
Um,
Okay,
but
I'm
I
cutting this
need
whole section.
thank you. But I need to refine the language around that.
Okay, another time. So the current call to action then would just be go to our website, txl-lab.com, and look for, there'll be a link there on executive burnout. And you click through that and get on Jim's calendar, and that page will explain all the details.
Brad.
Super. So I would say if I've never been a CEO at the level you've been, Jim, or at the level that, your current and future clients are at. So I don't, at most I can have a kind of a hypothetical empathy for what that's like. And I have to think it's got to be blacks. Okay, that's not true. I've coached several people who are, are or were at that level. And it is very hard even to ask for the help you need sometimes. Uh, and that takes a lot of courage to overcome some resistance you may have. I'll offer anyone who's listening this metaphor. You could have if you had the most amazing car in the world, you got a Rolls Royce, you got a Bentley, you've got some Bugatti, whatever. Okay, no matter how good the car is, you got to change the oil. And so, no matter how awesome you are, like you're a Bugatti, okay, you're an amazing human, you're top 1% performer. You still need maintenance. You still need to rest and refit. You still need to do the occasional back away from the details and rethink where you're at. Everybody does. That includes you. So don't be shy about really demanding that the world provide you the support that you need, because the support is there. All
Yeah,
you got to do
absolutely.
is reach out.
And, calls completely confidential. You don't have to tell anybody that you called me. Like, just, you know, and for me, the opportunity to help someone who might be in the same spot I was in a few years ago is profound.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very rewarding for you to do this work. Okay. I'd say that we're done. Final thoughts, any closing words, Jim, on the topic of executive burnout, or this offer that you've now decided to make, or anything around that topic?
In closing thoughts, I think there is a better way. Like, there's a new model of leadership that is a better way, and I am incredibly excited about the work that we're doing, and especially how it applies to this burnout situation, because um, you know there is a way to lead at a high level and still maintain your humanity and have a life.
Yeah. And get out of that horrible, stuck in the weeds, in the darkness, in the storm, lost your
Yep.
passion, lost your zest for life. Like you don't want to stay there. You don't have to stay there. You
Nope.
can get out.
Nope.
Super. Jim, I'm very excited that you're offering this. You're going to make a lot of people very happy with this offer. And I look forward to hearing more about it. But that's it for
Thank you.
now. I'm Thomas Cox. This is Jim Prinzing. We are your hosts for M2, Managing Managers. And we look forward to seeing you again in our next episode. Take care.